August 17th, 1943. 26,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. The B-17 shudders as flak bursts blossom around it, black, violent flowers tearing holes in the sky. The sound is not a single explosion, but a continuous tearing, like heavy fabric being ripped apart again and again. Inside the bomber, Staff Sergeant William Bill Hargreaves, ball turret gunner, curls into his cramped sphere of plexiglass and steel, fingers numb inside his gloves, eyes locked on the empty blue below. Then the radio crackles. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. They come out of the sun. Messerschmitt BF-109s and FW-190s drop through the formation like knives, cannon fire stitching across aluminum skin. A B-17 off the port wing takes a hit in the cockpit. It lurches, falls out of formation, engines trailing smoke. No parachutes. Hargreaves swallows hard and keeps firing. This is supposed to break them. That is what the Germans believe, that if they hit the bombers hard enough, often enough, the Americans will stop coming. They are wrong. On the ground below, Obergefreiter Karl Weiss, Luftwaffe Flak Auxiliary, watches the raid unfold from a concrete gun pit on the outskirts of Schweinfurt. He has been here since dawn, listening to the distant drone grow into a roar that vibrates through his chest. He watches black flak bursts pepper the bomber stream. He sees fighters slash through it. He sees aircraft fall, and yet the sky remains full. Wave after wave passes overhead, formations stretching so far that Weiss cannot see the end of them. When one box takes losses, another closes the gap. When a bomber drops out, the formation tightens around the hole as if it never existed. Weiss mutters to himself, not in fear, but confusion. How many do they have? By midday, Schweinfurt is burning. Ball-bearing factories are smashed, rail yards twisted. Smoke towers into the sky in thick columns that stain the clouds. But even as the last bombs fall, Weiss can still hear engines to the west. Another formation, another raid. This is not how air war is supposed to work. German doctrine, carefully built through the 1930s, assumes that strategic bombing is fragile. Aircraft are expensive. Crews are irreplaceable. Losses accumulate. Morale cracks. The attacker eventually pauses, regroups, recalculates. Instead, the Americans return, 2 days later. Then again the week after. Inside a Stalag Luft POW compound, months later, Weiss will sit across from captured American airmen and finally ask the question that has been clawing at him since Schweinfurt. "Why didn't you stop?" he asks one of them. "You lost so many." The American, a gaunt B-17 pilot with tired eyes, shrugs. "We had more." At the time, Weiss thinks it is bravado. It is not. Back in August 1943, Hargreaves's bomber limps back toward England with 2 engines shot out and holes punched clean through the fuselage. The crew counts the damage in silence. They count the empty positions too. Another aircraft missing from their squadron. Another crew gone. At the debriefing hut, the losses are read aloud. No one cheers. No one panics. The operations officer flips to the next page. Tomorrow's mission. That night, Hargreaves writes a letter home and does not mention the flak, does not mention the burning plane that vanished beside him. He mentions instead that a new crew arrived that afternoon. Fresh faces, newly issued gear. "They already know the routes," he writes, "like they've been doing this for years." He does not know how true that is. Across the Atlantic, in factories scattered from Seattle to Wichita, B-17s are rolling off assembly lines at a pace Germany cannot comprehend. Entire bomber groups are being formed, trained, equipped, and shipped overseas, while others are still flying combat missions. Replacement crews are already assigned before losses are fully counted. For Germany, every bomber shot down is a victory to be measured. For America, it is an expected variable. In Berlin, Luftwaffe analysts study raid photographs and kill claims with mounting unease. The numbers no longer add up. German fighters are destroying dozens of bombers per mission, and yet the size of the formations does not shrink. If anything, they grow. General Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters, will later describe the moment of realization with blunt clarity. "We were winning the battles," he says, "and losing the war." But in 1943, that realization is still forming, slowly, painfully. For Weiss, the understanding comes not in the heat of battle, but in captivity. Captured during the Normandy retreat, he is transported to a POW camp in England. There, for the first time, he sees the airfields up close. Rows of bombers parked wingtip to wingtip, crews walking calmly between them. New aircraft arriving while damaged ones are being towed away. He counts out of habit, then stops. There are too many. The Germans had believed American bombing was an effort, something that could be exhausted. What Weiss is seeing now is something else entirely, a system, and systems do not get tired. As winter approaches and bombing raids continue through clouds, flak, and fighter attacks, one truth becomes impossible to escape. The Americans are not asking whether they can afford the losses. They have already decided that they can, and that decision changes everything. February 20th, 1944, Central Germany. The sky is grey, flat, and endless, the kind of winter ceiling that presses down on everything beneath it. From a rail siding outside Leipzig, Feldwebel Ernst Kappel, a Luftwaffe recovery officer, stands with his hands buried deep in his greatcoat pockets and watches smoke drift across a frozen field. Another bomber is down, what remains of it at least. The wreckage lies scattered in a wide arc. A torn wing section, half buried in snow. An engine embedded nose first into the ground. Fragments of aluminum skin, fluttering weakly in the wind like discarded paper. Kappel has seen this scene so many times he could inventory it blindfolded. 4 engines, 10 men, 1 aircraft. He marks it down in his ledger with practiced efficiency. But lately, the ledger has begun to feel dishonest, because every entry represents something Germany understands very well. A loss inflicted, a crew killed, a machine destroyed. What the ledger cannot record is what happens on the other side of the channel. Kappel radios the coordinates to headquarters and waits for the salvage crews. They will recover what they can. Guns, instruments, sometimes bodies. He lights a cigarette and stares at the sky, listening. In the distance, the sound is already returning. A deep, layered thunder, another formation. He exhales slowly. They didn't even pause, he mutters. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe has become very good at destroying American bombers. Improved tactics, concentrated flak belts, head-on fighter attacks. Everything that can be thrown at the bomber stream is thrown. Losses climb. On some days, the Americans lose 60, 70 aircraft in a single mission. German officers expect this to matter. It does not. Inside a POW enclosure in East Anglia, Lieutenant Hans Richter, former Bf-109 pilot, listens as American airmen trade stories over weak coffee. Richter was captured after bailing out over Belgium. He has shot down bombers himself. 3 confirmed. He expects bitterness. Instead, he hears scheduling. "One more run this week, then we rotate," one American says. "They're pushing us north tomorrow. New targets." Richter frowns. "Your losses," he says carefully. "They are acceptable." The Americans exchange looks. One shrugs. "They don't like them," the man says, "but they planned for them." That word again. Planned. Back in Germany, planning has become something else entirely. At Luftwaffe headquarters, charts cover the walls. Aircraft destroyed, pilots killed, fuel expended. The kill curves are impressive. On paper, the defense appears to be working. And yet every morning, the radar screens fill again. New bomber groups appear with unfamiliar markings. Crews rotate. Tactics adjust. Escort fighters, now long-range P-51 Mustangs, stay with the bombers all the way to the target and back. Richter, now grounded and captured, hears the rumor before he sees the proof. The Americans are training faster than we can kill them. At first it sounds absurd, but the evidence is everywhere. In March 1944, a raid strikes Berlin itself. The losses are heavy, on both sides. But 2 days later, another raid follows. And another. No pause. No operational lull. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, is bleeding pilots faster than it can replace them. Training hours are cut. Fuel shortages worsen. Veteran instructors are reassigned to combat because there is no one else. Every German loss is final. Every American loss is temporary. Kappel sees this imbalance up close when he is assigned to inspect multiple crash sites over a single week. 3 bombers down in 5 days, spread across hundreds of kilometers. Each time, the wreckage tells the same story. Aircraft shot to pieces. Crew fought to the end. Mission completed anyway. At one site, a bomb load has already been dropped before the aircraft went down. The target, an oil facility, is burning in the distance. Kappel stares at the smoke and realizes something unsettling. Even destroyed, the bomber has done its job. In captivity, Richter finally sees what Germany never truly accounted for. One afternoon, POWs are marched past an English airfield. Richter cannot help himself. He counts. 50 bombers on one strip, another 40 beyond. More arriving. Ground crews work methodically, swapping engines, patching flak holes, refueling as if on an assembly line. An American guard notices Richter staring. "You like planes?" he asks. Richter hesitates, then answers honestly. "I used to hunt them." The guard nods, almost sympathetically. "Must have been a hell of a job," he says. "We're building about 1 every hour back home. 1 every hour." Richter stops walking. That number lodges in his mind and refuses to leave. Back in Germany, Luftwaffe officers begin to sense the trap closing. Destroying bombers no longer reduces pressure. It merely confirms how much pressure America can absorb. A senior flak commander writes in his diary, "We are counting wrecks. They are counting schedules." By the spring of 1944, the bombing campaign has shifted tone entirely. American commanders no longer ask whether a target is too well defended. They ask whether it is time. Time tools. Richter realizes has become the American weapon. In May, as the bombing intensifies ahead of the Normandy invasion, German POWs watch the skies fill day after day. Some shake their heads. Others laugh bitterly. One older sergeant says it aloud. "They are not bombing us to break morale." He pauses. "They are bombing us because they can." That realization spreads quietly through the camps. The bombers never stopped coming. Not because the Americans were reckless, but because they had built a war machine that assumed loss and rendered it irrelevant. June 6, 1944, northern France. The sound reaches the ground before the aircraft do. A distant, layered roar. Engines overlapping engines. A vibration that seems to travel through soil and bone rather than air. In a hedgerow outside Caen, Obergefreiter Wilhelm Krüger, infantryman, lifts his head and listens as the sky begins to move. He has heard bombers before. This is different. The formation stretches from horizon to horizon, a moving ceiling of metal. Sunlight flashes off wings and fuselages in a rhythm so steady it feels mechanical. Flak batteries open fire almost on reflex, black bursts blooming uselessly beneath the stream. Krüger watches the bombs fall in lines. Roads, bridges, rail yards. Precise enough to feel intentional, indiscriminate enough to feel unstoppable. He thinks briefly, they can't keep this up. By afternoon, he knows better. Across occupied Europe, German non-soldiers are learning the same lesson in fragments and flashes. The bomber offensive does not surge and recede like earlier campaigns. It advances like a tide that does not retreat between waves. For years, German planners believed attrition would be decisive. Bombers were slow. Crews were finite. Losses would accumulate until the offensive collapsed under its own weight. On paper, the numbers support the theory. In early 1943, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids cost the Americans dearly. Dozens of aircraft lost in a single day. Crews killed or captured. Luftwaffe pilots celebrated. Analysts predicted a breaking point. But the breaking point never came. Instead, the raids resumed. Different routes, better escorts, heavier formations. By mid-1944, the escorts are everywhere. P-51s range freely over Germany, hunting fighters before they can reach the bomber stream. Luftwaffe aces score victories, sometimes spectacular ones, but each success feels smaller than the last. A downed bomber is no longer a victory. It is a statistic. In a POW camp near Cambridge, Hauptmann Otto Weiss, former intelligence officer, is shown aerial reconnaissance photos during interrogation. He recognizes targets: Hamburg, Kassel, Merseburg. The Americans ask routine questions. Then one officer gestures to a timeline pinned to the wall. "Notice anything?" he asks. Weiss studies it. The raids overlap. There is no recovery period. "You never stop," Weiss says quietly. The officer smiles without humor. Why would we? That question becomes impossible to answer. Back in Germany, factories are hit, repaired, hit again. Rail lines are severed, rerouted, severed again. Fuel plants burn faster than they can be rebuilt. Yet what truly erodes morale is not destruction, it is continuity. Every day brings bombers. Every night brings repairs. Every morning brings bombers again. Kruger experiences this rhythm firsthand during the retreat from Normandy. The roads are choked with wreckage. Vehicles destroyed not by ground combat, but by aircraft that appear with uncanny timing. Columns move at night. They are found anyway. He hears officers curse the damned bombers, as if the machines themselves are to blame. But deeper inside, something else is breaking. The sense that endurance will matter. At a Luftwaffe training base in late summer 1944, instructors face a grim reality. New pilots arrive with minimal hours. Fuel is scarce. Aircraft are precious. The bomber streams overhead daily, indifferent to these constraints. An instructor writes to his wife, "We train them knowing many will not live long enough to teach." That sentence captures the inversion of the war. On the American side, survival creates teachers. On the German side, survival is a temporary reprieve. In captivity, Weiss begins to grasp the scale of the difference. During a work detail near an airfield, he sees bombers landing with damage that would have grounded German aircraft permanently. Holes patched with bare metal, engines swapped in hours, crews debriefed and reassigned. Loss is absorbed, not mourned away, but managed. Weiss realizes that attrition, as Germany understands it, assumes symmetry. That what one side loses, the other feels equally. But this war is asymmetrical at its core. Germany loses irreplaceable experience. America loses replaceable machines, and replaces the men too. By late 1944, even high-ranking German POWs stop asking how many bombers were shot down. They ask how many more arrived. In December, during the Ardennes offensive, German hopes briefly rise. Poor weather grounds aircraft. The skies fall silent. For a moment it feels like 1940 again. Operations dictated by terrain and timing. Then the weather clears, and the bombers return in numbers that erase the pause entirely. Kruger, now retreating again, looks up as the familiar thunder resumes. He does not run. He knows it will not matter. The American bombing campaign has reached a stage beyond escalation. It is no longer a weapon wielded. It is a condition, one that does not depend on success or failure on any given day, only on continuation. And continuation by now is guaranteed. January 17th, 1945. Stalag Luftwand, Bath, Germany. Snow drifts against the wire as a group of German POWs are marched back from a work detail. Their coats are thin. Their boots are worse. Above them, faint but unmistakable, engines hum at altitude. American bombers passing east to west, already beyond reach. Oberleutnant Franz Keller, former Luftwaffe logistics officer, stops walking for a moment and looks up. No one orders him to move. The guards don't bother. They know the sound as well as he does. It's every day now, Keller murmurs to no one in particular. Another prisoner answers without looking up. And every night, inside the barracks, the men gather around a crude stove, trading rumors the way soldiers always do. Cities hit, refineries burning, rail yards flattened. Someone mentions Berlin. What they do not talk about anymore is stopping the bombers. That idea has quietly died. Instead, the questions have changed. How many did they lose yesterday? How many crews didn't come back? At first, these questions felt comforting. Numbers implied progress. Attrition implied hope. But as weeks pass, the answers no longer add up. 10 bombers lost. 20, sometimes 30. And yet the next day, the sky is thicker than before. Keller sketches figures in the dirt with a stick. Aircraft lost versus raids observed. Crews downed versus formations counted. The math refuses to work. This isn't warfare, he says finally. This is accounting. Across the Atlantic, it is accounting. In a briefing room in East Anglia, American officers review mission results with calm detachment. Losses are noted. Targets are checked off. Replacement crews are already scheduled. A colonel points at a chart. Bomber losses above threshold yesterday. Output compensates by Thursday. No one reacts, because that is the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Back in the POW camp, Keller is interrogated again. Routine questions, routine answers. Then an American officer asks something unexpected. Why do you think we kept bombing after Schweinfurt? Keller hesitates. Because you had no choice, he says. If you stopped, we would rebuild. The officer nods. And because you could afford the losses, Keller adds quietly. That is the first time he says it out loud. Afford. The word sits uncomfortably in a war measured in lives. But it explains everything. Germany's bombing of Britain failed not because the Luftwaffe lacked courage, or aircraft, or early success, but because Germany could not afford sustained loss. Pilots were precious. Machines were limited. Each setback narrowed options. America, Keller now understands, never intended to avoid losses. It intended to outpace them. That distinction rewrites the entire campaign. The bombers were not meant to survive indefinitely. They were meant to arrive indefinitely. By February 1945, the skies over Germany are so crowded that German civilians begin marking time by the sound of engines. Morning raids, afternoon raids, night raids. Factories move underground. Then deeper, then disappear entirely. Still the bombers come. In Stalag Luftwand, Keller overhears a young guard complaining. Why don't they stop? Haven't they won yet? An older guard shrugs. They stop when the schedule says stop. That phrase, the schedule, follows Keller back to his bunk. He realizes something deeply unsettling. Germany is fighting a war of moments. America is fighting a war of processes. Moments can be won. Processes must be dismantled or endured, and Germany no longer has the means to dismantle anything. In March, Keller is assigned to help clear rubble after a raid near Rostock. The destruction is total. Yet even here, what strikes him most is not the damage. It is the speed. Repair crews already work among the ruins. Supply depots are being relocated. American bombers have not merely destroyed targets. They have forced Germany into permanent reaction. Always behind, always responding, never dictating. That night, Keller writes in a small notebook he has managed to keep hidden. We believed endurance would decide the war. We did not understand whose endurance mattered. When word reaches the camp of the Rhine crossings, the reaction is muted. The prisoners already know what that means. If the bombers never stopped coming when Germany still had defenses, they certainly will not stop now. The strategic bombing campaign has done more than destroy infrastructure. It has erased the idea that resistance can change the outcome. And among the German POWs, that realization settles long before surrender does. They are no longer waiting for defeat. They are waiting for the bombers to finally have no reason to fly. March 22nd, 1945, outside Würzburg, Germany. The sirens begin late this time, too late. By the time their rising wail cuts through the cold air, the sound everyone fears is already there. Engines, hundreds of them, layered so thick they blur into a single, continuous roar. The clouds glow faintly from reflected sunlight above the overcast. You cannot see the bombers yet, but you know they are coming. They always are. Feldwebel Otto Reimann, once a flak gun commander, now stands uselessly in a half-destroyed street, helmet tucked under his arm. His gun was knocked out weeks ago. His crew reassigned, scattered, killed, or captured. There is nothing left for him to do but watch. High above, contrails spread like chalk marks across the sky, intersecting, dissolving, reforming. The formations are enormous, so large they feel unreal, as if perspective itself has failed. Reimann shakes his head. "How many do you think?" someone asks beside him. Reimann doesn't answer. He has learned that counting is meaningless. Bombs begin to fall. Not in a rush, not in a single devastating wave, but in disciplined sequences. One stick follows another. Factories first. Rail yards next. Bridges last. The explosion feels methodical, almost restrained. This is not rage. It is routine. In a cellar nearby, civilians press hands over their ears and wait. They no longer scream. That stage passed months ago. Now they count seconds between detonations, guessing what has been hit, guessing what will still be there when the noise stops. Above them, American crews perform tasks they have done dozens of times before. Inside a B-17 over Würzburg, Second Lieutenant James Harlow checks engine gauges and watches flak bursts bloom uselessly below. He has been flying since late 1944. This is his 12th mission. He remembers being told not to think about individual raids. "Think about the campaign," his squadron commander had said. "Your job isn't to survive today. It's to make sure tomorrow happens." Harlow understands that now. He knows that even if his aircraft is hit, if he is wounded, or worse, the mission will go on. Another bomber will fly his slot tomorrow. Another crew will take his place. The formation does not depend on him, and that knowledge steadies him more than courage ever could. On the ground, Reimann watches a factory disappear beneath a rolling cloud of smoke and debris. He knows the building. He worked there once, before the war, when it produced machine parts and paid decent wages. Now it is simply gone. Reimann thinks of something a captured American had said during an interrogation months earlier. "You don't beat us by shooting us down," the man had said. "You beat us by stopping the line." At the time, Reimann had not understood. Now he does. The line was never here. It was never in Germany. It was in Detroit, in Seattle, in Wichita. In places German bombers never reached, never could reach, never even seriously threatened. Germany had been fighting the bombers as if they were weapons. They were not. They were symptoms. By April, German air defense reports stop using hopeful language altogether. No more talk of unsustainable losses or critical attrition. The tone shifts to administrative acceptance. Enemy activity continues at high levels. Operational disruption total. Interception ineffective. These are not battlefield reports. They are obituaries. In Stalag Luftwaffe, Keller receives a Red Cross parcel and shares it quietly with the men around him. Someone mentions that Hamburg was hit again. But it was already destroyed, another replies. That doesn't matter, Keller says. They're not bombing cities anymore. They're bombing recovery. That insight spreads through the camp quickly. The bombers are no longer trying to cripple Germany's ability to fight today. They are eliminating its ability to recover tomorrow. And that is something no amount of bravery can counter. In late April, as Soviet artillery draws closer from the east, American bombers still fly. Even now. Even with Germany collapsing on every front. A fellow prisoner asks Keller, "Why keep bombing now? What's left?" Keller answers without hesitation. So nothing grows back. When news of Hitler's death reaches the camp, the reaction is subdued. The war, for these men, ended long before that announcement. It ended the day they realized the bombers were not responding to German actions at all. They were executing a plan designed not to win battles, but to remove the possibility of recovery, resistance, or reversal. In early May, the bombers finally stop. The silence is shocking. Men look up instinctively, listening for engines that are no longer there. The absence feels heavier than the noise ever did. For Keller, the realization is immediate and final. The bombers did not stop because Germany surrendered. Germany surrendered because the bombers had already made every other outcome impossible. The war did not end with a final dramatic strike. It ended when one side proved it could absorb loss forever, and the other could not. May 10th, 1945, near Kassel, Germany. The war is officially over, but the sky still feels wrong. There are no bombers now, no escorts, no contrails clawing at the clouds. Yet men keep looking up, as if expecting the sound to return at any moment. For years, the engines had been a constant, an artificial weather system that arrived on schedule and left nothing unchanged. Now there is only quiet. Hauptmann Ernst Keller stands with a group of recently liberated prisoners outside a shattered rail yard. American guards are relaxed, almost casual. Trucks idle nearby. Cigarette smoke drifts upward, unchallenged by sirens. Keller realizes he has not heard a siren in days. That, more than anything, tells him the war is truly over. An American intelligence officer approaches the group with a clipboard, accompanied by an interpreter. The questions are methodical. Unit designation, position, supply status, morale. Keller answers automatically. He has done this before. Then the officer pauses, hesitates, and asks something different. "Why," he says carefully, "did you think the bombing would stop?" The interpreter repeats it in German. Keller looks at him for a long moment before answering. "Because it should have," Keller says. "Any rational air force would have stopped." The officer raises an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because the losses were unacceptable," Keller replies. "Crews destroyed. Aircraft destroyed. No air force can sustain that." The American nods slowly. "Ours could." That is the moment it finally crystallizes. Not during the raids, not during captivity, not even during surrender. But here, after the noise has stopped. Germany had always assumed that bombing campaigns functioned like battles. Apply pressure, incur losses, reach a breaking point, reassess. That assumption was wrong. The Americans were not asking whether the bombing was worth the cost. They had already answered that question before the first bomber crossed the coast. The cost was built into the plan. Later, Keller is transported past a U.S. airfield, hastily converted for occupation use. Hundreds of aircraft sit parked in neat rows, B-17s, B-24s, transports, fighters. Some are damaged, some patched, some clearly nearing the end of their service life, and yet they are still there, still numerous, still orderly, still replaceable. A German mechanic riding beside Keller whispers, almost to himself, "They could have kept going." Keller nods. "Yes," he says, "that's the worst part." Post-war interrogations across Allied zones begin to reveal a pattern. German POWs ask the same questions again and again. How many planes did you lose? How many crews? When did it almost break you? The answers disturb them. Losses are acknowledged, but framed statistically. Crews are mourned, but replaced. Aircraft are destroyed, but replenished. There is no emotional breaking point, only production curves. One former Luftwaffe officer phrases it best during a debriefing in England. "We fought you as if you were an army. We did not understand you were an industry." American officers do not argue with that assessment. They do not need to. The records speak for themselves. In 1943 alone, the United States produced more heavy bombers than Germany could destroy in total across the entire war. By 1944, replacement crews arrived faster than training schools could absorb lessons from the front. By 1945, the bombing campaign no longer depended on weather, resistance, or even strategic necessity. It had become self-sustaining. German POWs struggle to explain this to civilians after the war. People ask why the cities were hit again and again, why factories already destroyed were bombed once more. The answer sounds inhuman when spoken aloud. Because it was efficient. The bombing never stopped. Because stopping would have meant allowing recovery, and recovery was the only remaining threat. Years later, Keller will sit in a rebuilt cafe in Frankfurt, watching American cargo planes land at the new airport, planes carrying food, machinery, aid. He will think of the bombers again. Same country, same factories, same assembly lines, different purpose. And he will finally understand the full weight of what Germany had faced. Not just an enemy willing to sacrifice men, but an enemy capable of replacing them without slowing down. The bombers never stopped coming because they were never meant to. They were not tools of desperation. They were instruments of inevitability. Germany lost the air war, not because it lacked courage, technology, or skill. It lost because it fought a campaign. America fought a system. And once that system was in motion, no amount of destruction could persuade it to stop. Only the complete removal of the enemy's ability to resist. When German POWs asked why the bombers never stopped coming, there was no satisfying answer. Because the truth was too large to fit into a single explanation. The bombers never stopped. Because they didn't have to.